Welcome to the second video of an honorable death, my series on honorable deaths in history, with perhaps a special focus on Nordic history. Today I'm going to be doing a video on Harald Hard-Ruler, the last Viking king, and his death at Stamford Bridge. Behind me you can actually see a very large burial mound, Iron Age or Bronze Age, I'm not sure. It's not a very famous one, but it was here overlooking the bay, so I thought I'd include it in shot. Really nice area this. Anyway, so this is Harald Hard-Ruler and his death. And yeah, if you have any comments, any corrections to what I say, or anything you want to add, please comment, and I'll do my best to give good answers and stay up to date with that. So let's dive into it. So, King Harald Hard-Ruler, so named because he ruled quite ruthlessly, and basically his complete reign in Norway and his actions overseas were all about warfare. He was remembered among the Norwegian kings as one of the most gifted warriors and tacticians and strategists, and but also remembered for his hard rule, of course, and also his kind of a greed of glory. He could be jealous of others' success on the battlefield, but he was also very charitable. He rewarded people well and didn't hold grudges like that, except if you crossed his path to glory. And he's also what is usually kind of said as the last king of the Viking Age, and with an exclamation mark, because of his quite extreme life. Basically from when he was 15, he was almost constantly on the war path until he died at about 50. So Harald Hard-Ruler's life, as we know it, starts from Stiklestad, the Battle of Stiklestad, where Saint Olaf was defeated and killed. And Harald was 15 years and he fought at the battle. He was the half-brother of Saint Olaf, so he also had strong claims to the inheritance of the Norwegian kingdom. Harald was wounded and barely escaped. And after the defeat, with Knut the Mighty claiming Norway as part of his northern empire, Harald had to escape Norway, and he escaped east into the same areas that Saint Olaf escaped when he was kicked out of Norway, and that was to the Novgorod and the Kiev and Rus areas in the east, along the Don River, and yeah, the eastern parts there. And King Harald, he stayed there a while, and then he traveled south, like many other Viking lords and Viking warriors, to what the Vikings called Miklagard, which was Constantinople or Istanbul today. And at that time, the Byzantine Empire, or the Eastern Roman Empire, was still active and a force to be reckoned with, dominating that whole area, although the Islamic Caliphate was creeping in on them and taking over large areas at the same time. So the Varangian Guard that Harald came into was kind of the special forces of the Byzantine Empire. It was mercenary troops of Scandinavian warriors, and they traditionally were yeah, kind of like the shock troops of the Byzantine Empire. And Harald, according to the sagas, Harald quickly became the dominant leader for the Varangians and fought beside Gyrge, as it said in the sagas, Gyrgos, who was the general of the Byzantine forces proper. And he was set to, with his men, to rid the eastern Mediterranean of pirates, which they supposedly did. And also they were, together with many other of the Byzantine forces, sent into Persian, Mesopotamian areas. And the sagas say he conquered 80 borgir, strongholds. Now a borg doesn't have to be a castle. It can be like a fortified town or stuff like that. Anyway, they conquered. He with the Byzantines, subdued large areas going east from the Byzantine power center. They also had extended warfare on Sicily, where Harald was involved, and Harald, he was also sent to subdue the Bulgarian areas, and he was one of the main generals of that action and led the forces in victory for the Byzantine Empire, and he earned a nickname for that, and he was called Harald Bulgarbrenner, which means Harald Bulgarian burner. So his nicknames weren't exactly peaceful. Anyway, he was serving under the Emperor Michael, and then as things go, there was a power change with a new emperor, and all political alliances were in the balance, and King Harald and his men fell out of favor. He was incarcerated for a while during the revolts, and managed to escape. According to the sagas, he exacted revenge over the new emperor by stabbing his eyes out. And actually that emperor was blinded during the revolt. If it was Harald or not, other sources don't say. But according to the Nordic sources, it was Harald who personally stabbed out the eyes. He had to escape, which Constantinople, and get away, which he then did. And there's one story when they're trying to escape where they have to cross the Bosporus Strait, but forces have set up the Byzantine forces have set up a chain blocking on the water, so you can't just sail through the strait, blocking ships. And what Harald then orders his men do is to row they have two long ships, to row all they can towards the chains, and right before they strike the chains, to go to the back of the long ship while it's gliding forwards. So it kind of goes up like this and skids onto the chain. And then he orders the men to run forth to the other end, the front end of the ship, thereby tipping the ships over the chains. Unfortunately, only one ship made it, which was Harald's ship. The other ship cracked while doing this, and the men were either killed or captured. But he escapes and travels north, where his nephew, King Magnus, is now ruling Norway and Denmark, with a claim to the throne in England, because he's the inheritor of the kingdom of Knut the Mighty. The Danes accept King Magnus's rule, so Harald is traveling to quite a powerful Nordic unified kingdom and he wants to claim his inheritance as the brother of Saint Olaf. So when they come north, after a little bit of squabbling, Magnus accepts and gives him half of Norway, while Magnus retains the other half. And but they never really get on good terms. Magnus, as part of the deal, whenever they're together, Magnus is to be kind of like the main king, have the high seat, and and in all ways be counted as the chief king over Harald Hard-ruler, and this doesn't sit well with Harald Hard-ruler. But Magnus, he perishes eventually, and Harald Hard-ruler has to set out to claim both all of Norway and all of Denmark. But for several reasons, probably because he's been away so long, and also all the people around Trondheim, they weren't very happy with his father, his half-brother, Saint Olaf, because he was a violent guy. He christened Norway very harshly, and Harald Hard-ruler doesn't exactly have a different reputation. So the unity that Magnus the Good managed to create is lost, and Denmark comes under the control of the Danish princes again with Svein Ulfsson, and Harald Hard-ruler, he basically spends all his time trying to regain Denmark and consolidate Norway. He does manage to consolidate Norway very harshly, killing all his enemies and betraying them, and and ruling with an iron fist. But this doesn't play well in Denmark, where he goes every summer on punishing missions, burning this area. All the farmlands around here would have been burnt, because he traveled down from Vendelskagen down the east coast towards Fyn, and he burnt all the farmland on the east coast of Denmark. So all this farmland, or a lot of it, would have been set to the torch, or the farms at least, by King Harald during some of his punishing reigns. And of course that didn't make him popular in Denmark. Quite the opposite. They never took to him. So he never gained Denmark. Which brings us closer to his final hours. In England at the time, Harald Godwinson, King Edward had perished, and Harald Godwinson had laid claim to the throne, and he had his Earl Tosta was deprived of basically all his privileges. He was a very well-liked earl in the northern parts, and he tried to, having lost his privileges and power, it was too shameful for him to stay in England, so he travels first to Denmark, to Svein Ulfsson, to try and raise an army to lay claim to the English throne and kick Harald Godwinson out, but it has no luck. And then as a kind of a last resort, because of Harald Hard-ruler's reputation, he doesn't go there first, but he knows he's Harald. If anyone can fight, it's Harald Hard-ruler. So he goes north to Harald Hard-ruler, and he manages to convince him that it's now England is there for the taking. Also, Harald Hard-ruler has a claim, being, in a sense, an inheritor after Knut the Mighty's northern empire. So Harald Hard-ruler, he sees that maybe there's some redemption here. He didn't manage to take his inheritance in Denmark, but now he can do it in England because he has a popular earl to front his case. So he takes out what they call a half-leidang, which is half of the battle ready people in the Norwegian towns and villages around are called to, and this would be especially the western part of Norway, or coastal Norway, are called to arms. So it's like his professional army and a larger popular army, but not a full laydown, not the full army. That would be a massive undertaking. So he's counting on getting the support locally in the north of England, going south through Earl Tostig, or Tosta as is said in Norse. And all in all, there are 200 warships according to the sagas, and usually historians go back and forth on, does that mean 150 or 300 or whatever? Well, it says in the sagas, the only sources we have, 200. And although Snorre doesn't always get things right, it's usually because he doesn't know the geography or blah blah blah. It's not because he's lying. And the way he characterizes the deaths of kings and earls is often quite unflattering, even if they're in the royal lineage. They if they die of a very unromantic reason or do stupid things, if they're not tall, they're described as short. If they're fat, they're described as fat. So it's the only source we have. So I'm going with 200 ships, and that's not counting the auxiliary ships for material, food, and all that. And they sail over to England, and quite quickly start subduing the areas around York and the north in Northumbria. And they hold several battles with the Norwegian forces, with their more and more English allies. Hold the place of slaughter, as they would say in the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle. They have very successful warfare, and this is also a general who really almost hasn't seen defeat throughout his entire career. He's a very successful general and a strong warrior himself. So just his reputation would instill fear. He defeated the Danish king at the Battle of Nisa. Is a famous Norwegian battle where the Danish had 300 longships against a Norwegian force of 150 longships. They tied the longships together, and they would kind of fight on the boats. And King Harald, with half the men, completely obliterated Svein Ulfsson's army. So he was very capable. And on the battlefield, if he wasn't a good motivator in civilian life, he definitely was so on the battlefield. So they had successes, and they come to York, and York doesn't want to get involved with fighting King Harald Hard-ruler, so they lay down their arms and submit to him. Unfortunately for King Harald Hard-ruler, he doesn't leave forces in York itself. They go back to their ships, and they agree with the people of York that they'll return the next day, and everything will be finalized, and King Harald can probably continue going south on his mission. What King Harald doesn't know is that when Harald Godwinson has been on a forced march through England at the same time in order to stop the Norwegian invasion. And they've been marching double time or more for several days in order to try and have a surprise attack on the Norwegian forces. And they're in very, very large luck. When they come to York, they come to an unprotected city, and they can lay ready in the areas there for when King Harald and his men will be coming to do basically a peace deal. So the next day, King Harald, he tells his men, for every three men, one man will stay with the ships, and 2 men will go with him to York, which means 2/3 of the army will go to York. But they won't go armored. They only take a shield and a spear and a sword. So they're going brynjelaus, which means without armor, to meet the townsmen of York. On the way, they meet the main force of the English army with cavalry, and this was also a very formidable force. And when King Harald was planning this conquering of England, he was advised against it, actually, because of the knights, of the English army, tingmannamen, they called it. The Norse were very well respected, and many said that one of those could deal with two Norse warriors. King Harald didn't agree, of course, but this was also a really good force, and a large one, much larger than King Harald's force, and 1/3 of his men was down at the harbor, or where they had their ships. So with this force approaching, King Harald is given the choice. He can retreat back to the ships in all haste, armor up, and fight by the ships, because then he has the option to escape if things go wrong. Or he can make a stand without armor and try to hold the English forces while they call for backup. King Harald maybe sees he's in dire straits either way, and also he regards it shameful he regarded it shameful to now be conquering the English, and then at first sight of the army he would make a run for it. So he orders his men that the two fastest should ride back and get the force which is armored, and while he and the main part and the army, the army without armor, will stay and fight. And if it's to the death, it's to the death. And the battle at Stamford Bridge was a vicious battle. It was not only for the Norwegians. Almost the whole army was obliterated. It took a really heavy bite in the Norwegian nobility, and it's probably this massive defeat is probably why the Viking age kind of was crushed to an end. It was only because he was by the ships that Harald's son Olaf, who was later called Peaceful, probably because he didn't have the same capabilities after this to do anything non-peaceful, but he managed to escape with the boats, or was given free way by Harald Godwinson. And the battle also took an extreme toll on the English forces, so much so that Harald Godwinson was later defeated at the Battle of Hastings by William the Conqueror, the Norman. King Harald, he sees they have a lot of cavalry, so he starts organizing his forces with this in mind. And they make a rundfylki, like they do not organize their shield wall as a line, which would be the normal thing, but as a round, a circle. And this is because King Harald says if they're fighting with cavalry, they're not able to hold sustained attacks. They come in and do sharp attacks, and try to, with a brief, violent, sharp attacks, to break through the shield wall. And with by setting it up in a circle, the shield wall combined with spears, he's setting up a defense which will make these attacks really hard to execute, according to the saga. And this works. They actually are able to, for a while, to keep the integrity of the shield wall, even without their armor, and only with their spears. They also have the swords, of course, but they keep the shield wall. The English apparently see this, and gradually they start faking retreat or faking a pullback, and they actually manage to lure part of the Norse force into pursuit, whereupon they pounce violently on that area of the shield wall where there is now a weakness, and they break through. And King Harald, he gets really pissed off. He goes berserk. He goes a berserkergang. So, seeing that his shield wall has been broken, he throws everything, just takes his sword, and goes with his forces to try and consolidate or to stop what's happening in that part of the shield wall. And in this in the sagas, he says he goes forth so violently with both hands on his sword, so neither helmet or a ringbrynje, which is the chainmail, could stop his strikes, and he kills left and right. And this is how he ends his life in berserkergang, because he's killed by an arrow while trying to close the shield wall again. He's got struck by an arrow in the throat and dies. The Norwegians now, instead of retreating, they actually take up a furious fight, following his example, and the main battle kind of. King Harald falls quite early in this action, fighting in front of his men in berserkergang, and then the Norwegians just go at it furiously, and it says they fight so hard with the English that many, of course, die, but from wounds, but many also died from exhaustion. The battle was so intense. Many people died from exhaustion. And when they there's this long action now, and then they start giving ground. Then the reinforcements from the shore come, and they have mail and weapons on. They have armor and weapons, and there's a third fight, and this one goes into the deep night, and the casualties on the Norwegian side are devastating. Almost all of the Norwegian nobility that took part in the action, which was most of the coastal Norwegian nobility, they're killed. And this is also why the kind of the Viking ends. The last aggressive Norse king takes with him all his nobility in his grave. His son is though survives, Olaf, and is allowed to return to Norway. But it's also devastating for the English. They managed to crush King Harald's army, but they're have so many losses and casualties that the English army, when it has to defend at the Battle of Hastings only 16 days later, they're exhausted, they've lost many of their best men, and they lose, of course, to William the Conqueror, the Norman invasion there. So Harald, in a way, had a fitting end to the Viking ages, and he was kind of a throwback to the days of Ragnar Lodbrok and Ivar Beinløs, and also the great legendary heroes. King Harald, he was no less that type, but he wasn't a particularly talented civilian ruler, unfortunately. But there's another story which with this, which also is an honorable death in this connection. Harald, of course, is it. Say he decides to stand his ground without armor, and they put up a good fight. And the sagas are honest. They say, of course, as in all battles, some people flee and some stay the ground. And then the saga tells about those who did stand their ground. There's another story from the battle at Stamford Bridge, which I think is interesting when we're talking about honorable death. Sometimes it's treated as myth, and so I wanted to talk a little bit about it, because I'm not so sure it's myth. It's the quite famous story about the lone Viking, and it goes so that during the Battle of Stamford Bridge, on the bridge itself, for a period, there was a Viking fighting with a Dane axe, which is a double-handed battle axe, and he held the bridge, killing dozens of the enemy's soldiers before himself being killed. And they didn't manage to kill him in the hand-to-hand combat, melee combat. They had to sneak up under the bridge and pierce him with a spear. And it's such an amazing story because of the courage and skill and loyalty of that warrior. And the reason I don't think it's a myth, again, it's a numbers game. How can you kill so many people? Oh, it's not, I can't believe it. But we know even from our modern times, many stories from battle that are well documented where unsurmountable odds have been conquered. Seemingly unsurmountable odds. And this was maybe one of them. Only he didn't conquer them, he had to release his life. So the numbers game puts historians or others off, and it becomes regarded as myth. A strong story that could inspire loyalty is kind of kicked to the bin, and I think it's a shame. And I think it's not necessarily a myth, because this story doesn't come from the Norse themselves. It's not like trying to dress up a defeat as a victory story. This story comes from the Anglo-Saxon chronicles, the chronicles in the English monasteries, where it's mentioned. And they're not fancy or anything, and they're definitely not pro-Norse. But it's mentioned there that one warrior held Harald's forces at bay out alone with Dane axe for a long, long time. Which they were definitely not writing these chronicles to heap praise on Harald Hard-ruler or the betrayal of the Earl Tosti. So I think it's a numbers game. If maybe you don't believe he defended him that well, but this is what a source that isn't biased towards the Norse relates about the so-called lone Viking. So it would be easier to disbelieve if it was in the saga. But even if it was there, like I said, Snorri gets his facts wrong sometimes, or we think he gets his facts wrong. But it's never like lying or making stuff up. I know some historians say he does, but I always the arguments for him being a liar also long stretches many times. Like they're not so strong. But he does definitely get things wrong. But I just wanted to put it out there that this story comes from the Anglo-Saxon chronicles, not from the Norse sources. So it gives it more reliability, in my opinion. And I think that's also why I'm doing the series. These stories are strong. Like Harald Hard-ruler, he knows he's gonna die, and he chooses to fight without armor because it's in his eyes, is a beautiful way to die. And the lone Viking, his example also is, unless you just step on it and call it a myth or whatever, if you don't do that, it can be an inspiring story, and these examples are important. It can be quite helpful in life. If you have examples of people who come through hardship, it can be quite helpful to remember them when you're going through hardship. Anyway, that was Harald Hard-ruler on his death at Stamford Bridge, and a little bit on his life as well. Yeah, if you enjoyed this content, please subscribe. I'll be making more videos on this, and if you have any suggestions how I can improve, or if I get things wrong, or you agree or disagree, please leave a comment, and I'll do my best to try to answer all comments. And yeah, that was that for now.